Thanks everybody for having Department of Finance here. And as Keith was saying, I think many of you will know Chris pretty well in his current role and in his former role as Deputy Minister of Agriculture. So I'm sure it's a great disappointment that I'm standing before you today. But I really am truly happy to be here. I was asked to speak a little bit about the Canada-US situation in particular, but happy to cover other topics that may be of interest to the group in the Q&A session. I have a feeling that Mr. Couturier might be posing a few questions just based on the frequency with which he came to the mic in the nomination portion. So I look forward to that. So maybe just to introduce myself, I'm Sam Millar. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Economic Development Corporate Finance Branch at the Department of Finance. We do a number of things, including support the Minister of Finance in terms of fiscal policy for the Department of Agriculture as well as CFA AGM. It's my first time at the AGM, so I'm very pleased to see a little bit about how the organization operates. I don't have responsibility for tariffs in my role, but I am and my team thinking really hard about if tariffs come into effect, what might be the government's response in terms of supporting consumers, supporting sectors, supporting regions. So that's part of the work that we have underway. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, même si j'aurais aimé que nous nous rencontrions dans des circonstances différentes. Like all of you, I fully appreciate and share the concerns around the potential for a 25% tariff on Canadian imports to the US. It looks more and more likely that threat will unfortunately materialize. And we're very concerned about the economic consequences of that situation. And I think you'll have seen from the various statements by the Prime Minister and the ministers responsible the laser focus on doing everything we can to prevent that from happening. And if it does happen, supporting the Canadian economy through effective measures. I know this is a diverse audience. I know you've got farmers and others involved in the agriculture sector from across the country in all sectors. I'm sure that the impact of tariffs would be slightly different on each of you, but everybody would feel that impact. Les représentants des gouvernements fédéral et provinciaux et les chefs d'entreprise canadiennes ont discuté de façon intensive avec l'administration Trump, les membres du Congrès et la communauté d'affaires américaine. The main message that we've been delivering on all fronts, and the one which has been well received by many key US business groups at the national and state level, is that a 25% tariff would be a very self-defeating action for the United States, and it would cause severe harm to American consumers, workers, and to the US economy broadly. We've been perfectly clear that any US tariffs are unjustified and would constitute a direct and flagrant violation of the US market access obligations under the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, as well as American commitments under the World Trade Organization. It's important that stakeholders on both sides of the border speak out about the harmful impacts of potential tariffs. And I want to extend my gratitude to all of you who are in the room today who might have done that already. Those interventions are extremely important and very valuable. J'exhorte les leaders agricoles à discuter avec leurs clients et partenaires commerciaux américains et je les encourage à exprimer leurs préoccupations quant aux répercussions que les droits de douane américains pourraient avoir sur eux. Concerns expressed by American stakeholders to their elected officials, both in Congress and at the state level, as well as to representatives of the Trump administration, are likely to have the most influence on the administration's decision-making. We've heard anecdotally how effective that has been in a variety of sectors, and so I would just encourage you to continue that outreach, those outreach efforts. I also wish to thank my Canadian government colleagues who've been working around the clock to engage with the U.S. administration, and truly this has been a full court press of the highest priority in their attempts to address the issues of concern such as border security, drug trafficking, various aspects of the economic relationship. I know you're going to hear from my colleague Aaron Fowler in a little bit later today, and I'm sure he'll be able to provide you with a bit more detail about exactly how those efforts have been going. Those efforts are extremely important to avoiding a trade war and finding a new balance in our bilateral relationship with the United States. But we can only hope for the best while planning for the worst. As the Prime Minister has demonstrated, should the U.S. impose unjustified tariffs against our country, the Government of Canada is prepared to act. Tout tariff imposé par le Canada viserait à protéger les intérêts canadiens en créant un effet de levier, une pression supplémentaire sur les États-Unis pour qu'ils suppriment leurs propres tarifs. Although it was not deployed, you would have seen the contours of the government's initial response about a month ago to broad-based American tariffs in early February. Canada's initial approach targets key finished goods on which the United States is export dependent, and Canadian consumers generally have alternative sources to choose from. This response has the advantage of minimizing disruptions to Canadian supply chains reliant on critical inputs and limiting the negative impacts on integrated sectors, including in the agricultural sector. Bien qu'elle ne fasse pas l'objet de consultations officielles, les parties prenantes sont invitées à donner leur avis sur la liste de marchandises publiée ou sur tout autre élément plus général de la réponse du Canada, afin de nous aider à poursuivre nos travaux visant à affiner la réponse du gouvernement. So just to say again in English, we really do invite input on that draft list from all Canadians. In the case of a protracted trade action, our government realizes the need for domestic support measures, and we're committed to helping Canadians, especially affected workers and businesses, to get through challenging circumstances should they materialize. To minimize the adverse effects stemming from Canada's potential countermeasures, the government intends to establish a remissions process to consider requests for relief in exceptional circumstances and on a transitional basis to ensure that Canadian importers, workers, and businesses are not unduly burdened by Canadian tariffs. I know there may be questions about exactly what that package of response measures may look like, and of course that's work that's still underway. It will depend exactly on the final form of the tariffs and their impact. But I can say that some of those measures could happen very quickly through automatic stabilizers, through existing authorities. Of course, there may be measures, and we'd really like to hear from you, and I welcome interventions in the Q&A session on the kinds of support mechanisms that you would favor. There may be some ideas like that would require new parliamentary authorities, and so that would need to wait until Parliament reconvenes after the prorogation period. Pendant la durée des mesures commerciales, le gouvernement surveillerait de près les répercussions économiques, notamment en fonction du secteur, et en consultation continue avec l'industrie et les associations commerciales. Canada will work to ensure that essential supports are in place for Canadian businesses and workers in order to help mitigate the economic impacts. In this respect, as well as on Canada's tariff approach, my colleagues and I are always welcome your views and suggestions to make sure. And I know that many of you have been participating in the weekly stakeholder calls that Chris actually has been chairing for the most part. I think he was not chairing the most recent one, but has been doing that on a weekly basis. And those calls will continue. We found them a very valuable source of regular input. I think I'll conclude there, Keith, if that's okay, and really happy to take any questions that folks might have or comments. Thank you.
So thanks so much, Sam. Now it's your turn. He's here. I know there's burning questions out there, so Siri, you can start us off.
Might not be a question. Is the Minister of Rural Economic Development and Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency in the room? Is Cody Blois here? I think he'd like to hear some of the answers, or maybe potential, since you are involved with economic development as well in the Department of Finance. So, as you may know already, Atlantic Canada, that includes Newfoundland, Labrador, and the Maritimes, on a per capita basis, we're probably the largest producers of ag and agri-foods on a per capita basis. And so these tariffs are going to really impact farmers and agri-foods producers, including the fish harvesters, tremendously. So is there a strategy that you're aware of, or how you're going to respond to any tariffs that may come on the ag and agri-foods sector?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the details of those specific responses are still under development. It will depend a little bit on the specifics of the tariff package that the U.S. brings into place, as well as the response package that the Government of Canada puts into place. But already some of the initial ideas and kind of first wave, those concepts are already under development. We're looking at previous economic crises for reference points and for the most effective ways of responding. I'll give you one example, which is around business liquidity. I think Farm Credit Canada was one of the AGM sponsors. And so we've been working very closely with Farm Credit Canada, as well as the other financial crowns, to think about ways in which business liquidity can be increased for farmers and for other small and large businesses in a way that would mitigate some of the impact of those tariffs. So that's just one example of the kind of thing that is something we're exploring very diligently right now.
The only reason I was saying that is because I do know in the past, at least in Atlantic Canada, the Minister of ACOA, that portfolio has been helpful in issues like that, right?
Yeah.
When it was related to trade.
I think that's a great point, and one of the things that maybe differentiates this likely potential economic situation from previous ones is that it's likely to be right across the entire country geographically, and it's likely to be not contained to one or a handful of economic sectors. It really could be felt in all sectors of the economy. And so that does present perhaps a bigger challenge in terms of responding. But I think regional development agencies could play a very key role. There are regional development agencies in all regions of the country, and each one knows the sectors of the economy that are strong or important in its region. And so we do think that RDAs could play a very important role.
Yeah, Ron Bonnet, past president CFA, not seeing any current members at the mic. It was pretty hard to stay away. I enjoyed your presentation. Now, you did mention about the engagement that's taking place across a number of departments in engaging with U.S. officials. I'd like to know what engagement there is now with other countries around the world, because this is not just something that Canada is facing. Europe is facing the same thing. Obviously Mexico as well. And I just wondered if you wanted to comment about how other countries are taking a look at whether there should be a unified strategy or approach to dealing with what is obviously a negotiating strategy of the current administration.
That's a terrific question. I'm not sure I'm in a position to give you a fully comprehensive view of that kind of engagement, but that kind of engagement is certainly going on. My colleague Aaron Fowler, who will be here in a little bit later in your program, he likely could give you a more comprehensive picture. I know his deputy minister was doing outreach in a number of European capitals. There's a G20 meeting going on as we speak in South Africa, or about to begin in South Africa. all of Canada's high commissions and embassies are actively engaged in that kind of outreach. So it is happening. It's probably a little quiet, perhaps a little bit below the surface, but that's a very important part of the outreach. It is not, I can assure you, not just a bilateral Canada to US outreach that's going on.
Quickly, any more questions? How are you going to the mic?
Thanks, Keith. Howard Baines from Lanark County. I happen to be speaking with a former colleague of yours, Jay Kosla.
Yeah, Jay, I know Jay very well. Yeah.
Good. So Jay is at the Public Policy Forum, working with stakeholders and drafting a list of 10 major infrastructure programs, maybe it's 12, for agriculture. One of the things that's really required is a second crossing under the Vancouver Harbor to replace or back up that second Narrows Bridge. But obviously, time will tell what the government's plans are in terms of supporting major infrastructure that allows our trade corridors to switch over time from north-south to east-west. So be that a pipeline that takes natural gas and oil east, or a bridge at Vancouver for the rail, or a tunnel at the Vancouver Harbor. What are the plans that you can tell us about in terms of those major infrastructure projects to further our exports?
Sure. Well, infrastructure is a big category. The government, is not in the practice per se of targeting very often. There are some exceptions: the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline, the Gordie Howe Bridge, of targeting specific infrastructure programs. The general approach that we have is to have funds that support partners, subnational governments, provinces, territories, municipalities, and others, airport authorities, port authorities, to pursue projects that they have in mind, that they've identified as things that would help, either from a trade perspective or from a community mobility, community infrastructure perspective. And so, those funds are quite numerous. You have the National Trade Corridors Fund that's operated by Transport Canada. Very, very long-standing, very effective program, multi-billion dollars of funding there. You have the suite of programs at the infrastructure department, including those that focus on water, wastewater, and other forms of infrastructure. Some of those programs are coming to the end of their current funding cycles, and so there'll be a natural process, including in terms of the budget 2025, that will likely be tabled by the government to consider whether to provide additional funding or an extension of the funding to those programs. So that work is also underway.
And just a comment, many in this room will know that we have in Quebec, there's a strategic maple syrup reserve, and which ultimately controls the price of maple syrup in North America. To put in your thinking box, maybe there should be a strategic reserve for uranium or some other products that the United States depends on. Anyways, there's a thought for you.
Yeah, that's not the first time I'm hearing that kind of idea in the context of critical minerals, for sure. So thank you for mentioning that.
Mr. Chair, Sam, thanks, Sam, for coming. Ron Lemaire with Canadian Produce Marketing Association. A little bit outside of finance, but not relative to the Canadian dollar. And you talked about working across departments and where we're going with the Bank of Canada, but the Canadian dollar free fall, strategically of concern. looking at potential benefits on some of the export strategies, one thing, but in ongoing investment and potential growth within the sector, and our long game on the cost, many have already procured the inputs they need for this year, but as our dollar drops, those costs are only going to have to be taken on and a burden within our grower community and within our sector. So where do you see and how do you see that stabilization potentially, or has there been discussion about dollar stabilization?
Well, the Bank of Canada's independent bank, of course. It's the party that's responsible for monetary policy. The Department of Finance doesn't get involved in that. A floating exchange rate is a good shock absorber in a situation like the one we might be on the precipice of, in terms of helping the economy to work through an external shock like the imposition of tariffs by the U.S. But there are limits to that. I think that's the premise of your question, and we would agree with that. Department of Finance again doesn't have a role in monetary policy, but obviously we'd be concerned if there was a really steep decline in the value of the Canadian dollar.
Anyone else feel you coming to the mic?
I do welcome, just as you're coming up, I do welcome specific comments that you might have in terms of the kinds of interventions you would see in the agricultural space to mitigate the impact of tariffs. So we could do that separately or right now.
This may or may not seem connected to the last question, but to me, the last question was something we perhaps don't have as much control over because of international markets. But one of the things we do have control on is productivity. And we read regularly how chronic our productivity is in Canada. And I would like to see or hear from the government what initiatives they're going to have to help us with that. Because without putting words into your mouth, that seems to be one of the big problems we have. I'd love to hear what the government has to say about that.
Well, I'm not sure I can give you. I'm not an elected official, so I won't give you kind of a broad answer to a big policy question like that. But obviously, productivity growth, productivity improvement is a challenge the Department of Finance is quite concerned about. There are, if you look historically at the kind of economic challenging situation that we're again seemingly likely on the precipice of, those actually do in a way help with productivity growth. Historically, you can see that trend line. I mean, look, there's a number of things the government is doing to help support productivity. Actually, the agricultural sector is probably a very good example of a sector of the economy where productivity, is very high, and growth of productivity is very high. So I should commend you as well on that performance in your sector.
And I'll just say for the record, that was Phil Paxson, Canadian Ornamental Horde Association.
Good afternoon. Andrew Morris with Flowers Canada Growers. First, I want to say thank you very much for the weekly calls. Those are extremely informative. Our members are major exporters of products into the U.S., entirely reliant on the U.S., and first in line for impact in a lot of ways. So I wanted to share some of the pieces, the pinch points that we're seeing coming up very, very quickly in the event that there was a change. The first point that we're seeing a lot of concern with our members is around posting the bond necessary to continue to access that market. Some farms are being asked to find a lot of capital very, very rapidly, which makes us believe that there is going to be a real capital urgency. The second piece to that is loss of sales. We've got members that are already losing sales right now for later in the season. Our busiest season runs from Valentine's Day until Mother's Day, Easter. So this is go time for our guys. And people are already starting to look for alternative providers because the rhetoric around this is enough that retailers in the U.S. are trying to reduce their risk exposure. So we're losing sales today, not when it comes into place. And then the next place where we're going to see a significant pinch point is around liability and loan protection. From our sector, we estimate there's about $3.8 billion in long-term liabilities across greenhouse flower growers across the country, probably more when you look at greenhouse broadly. And most of the guys that are holding those loans are the guys that are also very, very reliant on the U.S. So they're not going to be able to pay those loans if they lose access to the market. So a few thoughts on our response and the way we approach this. The first thing is there's going to need to be support, capital support, very, very early and rapidly. And not just with respect to a counter-tariff environment, because I know the remission process is focusing a little bit more heavily on that. I would suggest there is going to need to be support for those sectors which are highly export reliant, not just being impacted by the counter-tariff piece. And I would stress, and I'm going to go on a limb and assume that many people in the room might agree with this, but agri-stability is not designed to handle the economic shock that we're talking about with respect to the tariff right now. I think that it would be very important to highlight that that is not prepared to address this. So loan protection is going to be another high priority item for the sector, finding ways to ensure people can keep up with their loans, and then finally calming the rhetoric, because the noise around all of this is resulting in buyers choosing not to pick something other than Canadian in the U.S. So they're already being advised to look for U.S. products. So I just wanted to share those points. I hope that's helpful. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing, and any way that we can support your effort, we're happy to do it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's extreme. I took a number of notes, very, very precise kind of link between response and the effect that you're seeing. And actually, just as I was coming in, Scott Ross was giving me a little briefing, and he mentioned exactly the situation that you're facing in terms of the Valentine's Day, Mother's Day dynamic. So I appreciate that. Especially appreciate the point you make about the kind of psychological overhang here, and how investment decisions are being made in the absence of certainty, and on the basis, I guess, of uncertainty. So yeah, thank you very much for those comments.
Martin Caron, UPR. Je vais y aller en français pour ma question, mon commentaire. Peut-être juste, vous avez mentionné, puis merci d'être là, vous avez mentionné la productivité. Quand je regarde, parce que le Canada, on est parmi les pays, on est le 8e pays au niveau des exportations, puis on a un leadership là-dessus. Mais si je regarde les pays du G7 présentement, vous avez parlé de productivité, puis on se retrouve l'avant-dernier pays au niveau du PIB. Ma question, quelle est la stratégie au niveau des finances en lien avec ça? Moi, j'ai ma réponse simple, c'est qu'on devrait investir davantage au niveau du secteur agricole et agroalimentaire, parce que c'est d'une base, comme on l'a mentionné tantôt au niveau du vidéo. Puis c'est une legacy, un héritage qu'on laisse. C'est pour ça que je me dis, je veux juste voir la stratégie derrière ça. Je pense qu'on est rendu à un temps qu'il faut vraiment investir dans notre secteur. Merci.
Okay. Mais merci bien pour la question. Comme j'ai mentionné en réponse à la question... OK. Non, mais je vais commencer en français et après ça, on verra. Comme j'ai mentionné en réponse à la question précédente, le secteur agricole déjà a un niveau très, très élevé en termes de productivité. Je viens de discuter, et je sais que très bientôt dans votre ordre du jour, John Stackhouse de la Banque Royale va se présenter. Je viens de discuter avec lui quelques idées en termes de productivité culturelle. One of the things we were talking about, and it links actually to another one of the previous questions, was the importance of linking agricultural markets in Canada to trade infrastructure, trade enabling infrastructure. And so that's certainly something that I'll take away from the conversation today, and I think it's an important one to look at. I think that's the kind of thing that would allow for market diversification and increases in productivity as well. Thank you for the question. Merci.
Sukhpal Ball, President of the BC Cherry Association, here representing the BC Ag Council. A few points. Keith brought up earlier the advance payment program. You know, a very important program for cash flow for farmers due to the cyclical nature. We have a tremendously long growing season, and cash comes at the very end if it does arrive. So definitely the Ministry of Finance could be working with Ag Canada to definitely boost that program to maybe the highest levels that we've seen yet would be very welcome for the agriculture across Canada. Now, with for decades we've been gearing our economy to service our neighbor right next door. So coming up with quick solutions, I think is going to be tough. But the sentiment across the country of supporting Canadian products, Canadian-made products, I think we do need to take advantage of that and make the investment so that down the road it pays off dividends, that if we do come across the situation again, that we've made those key investments and can produce or add value to our farm products. Talking to many farmers, the red tape, the willingness to stick your neck out and do a big project, there's less and less people willing to do that because of all the challenges on the finance side of how expensive it is to operate within Canada. So yeah, I guess more just comments and what I'd like to see back to working with Ag Canada is programs that will show some investment and dividends. There's going to be some hurt in the short term. I think that's what we do see happening. But another question just before was about agri-stability not being at that level for what we're going to face. I've been talking for many years, agri-stability hasn't been at the level for the extreme climate events that we've been facing the last 4 or 5 plus years all throughout Canada, especially in the Okanagan, I can speak to. So here's another element of this economic challenge that we're faced with, and our agri-stability, which is there to manage our risk, is going to fall quite short of getting the compensation it needs. So definitely a few areas that I think that we should be investing in, because I've been saying this more and more often. We have people crazy enough to be in farming right now. I suggest we keep them in farming, because exciting to see a lot of young farmers. I'm just past that scale of young farmer, but I think we do need to adjust the age, as Keith was saying. But it really comes down to, we've got a lot of people that are passionate or wanting to be in agriculture. Let's not miss an opportunity where we see a lot of people exit because they just can't bear the burden anymore. So I do strongly urge you to really work with agriculture and provide the financial capacity so that we can succeed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question.
Sorry, just before you jump in there, Steve, so we have 3 people left. Please be very brief on your questions. We do have our next speaker has arrived, so but I don't want to miss the opportunity while we have Sam here.
Steve Peters, Chair of the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers. More of a comment. Ontario, we have the largest concentration of glass in North America. 87% of what we grow in Ontario, so we are very productive as an industry. 87% of what we grow in Ontario goes stateside, $1.6 billion. We're not going to eat our way out of this in any way, shape, or form. And I think when you're having your interministerial discussions, it's extremely important to us that you look at the business risk management programming, because existing programs do not work well for the greenhouse sector. So I think I would encourage you, and we would encourage you, to start looking at some sector-by-sector scenarios of the challenges and impacts that we are going to face going forward, because 200 trucks a day leave Ontario and go stateside, and we are very integrated with North American trade, and the potential of the tariffs has a huge impact on us. So I think you can't just take the broad brush and look at agriculture as a whole in finding ways to help support our agricultural community. And I can tell you, Richard Lee and our staff are more than prepared to provide you some specific details about some of the detailed challenges that we face in the greenhouse sector. So that's what we ask, is that you do look at some commodity-specific strategies. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very clear. Appreciate that.
Colin Hornby, Keystone Ag Producers from friendly Manitoba. Just quickly, I just want to second the APP comments about the limit and the agri-stability changes were good. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the carbon tax on livestock, buildings, and greenhouses. And Grain drying definitely would be something that would be an immediate impact for producers. But I just had a question regarding counter tariffs. Has any consideration been given if we get into a situation where there's tariffs from the U.S. and counter tariffs are applied, how that money, if that's going to be distributed, and if so, if there's a way, a formula or something that you're looking at for different sectors or things like that? Thanks.
Do you want me to? So just on the couple of the folks mentioned the advanced payment program. I know, Keith, you mentioned that at the outset, and I heard you as I was coming in the room as well. That's something that's actively under consideration. We're well aware of the expiry of the raised eligibility limit there. So that's something that's very much under consideration right now. Very much take the point about agriculture is not a homogeneous sector. It's very diverse. I think I made that point, but I do very much take the point about the importance of looking at mitigation measures to respond in a targeted way. So that's something we can certainly take on board.
Thank you. Teresa Van Ray. I'm a director with Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I'm going to put my pork hat on right now in the sense that we ship pigs down to the U.S. Our pigs from Ontario feed a plant that makes the plant efficient. We have a very awesome working relationship with them. But as of today, if the tariff is on, it'll cost our farm $78 Canadian per pig that goes across the border with the tariff. And so the other thing is that we're going to lose money, obviously. That's not cost of production. But we don't have an alternate for those pigs that are not going to the U.S. So if those pigs are not able to go to the U.S., we can't just put them out in a field to grow. So there will have to be some spot for live animals, and I'm not just talking in the pork sector. So we have to be very cautious of what this could do to the overall relationships that we have now with our plants, but also the relationships that we have with our mental capacity to see what happens when these animals can't be sold, and the financial burden that our families will bear if this comes to fruition.